I'm Carys.
And I'm Ayeisha Thomas-Smith, and you're listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar.
A weekly look at the stories in the news that are being over-reported and the ones going completely under the radar and not being talked about enough. This episode is brought to you with Power to Change to celebrate Community Business Week. This episode is brought to you with Power to Change to celebrate Community Business Week. Sometimes changing the world starts with changing something in your local area. Power to Change backs the people running community businesses, whether that's a pub, farm, library, or leisure centre. From the 29th of November to the 5th of December, Community Business Week is a national celebration of the businesses that make our local areas vibrant, resilient, and inclusive. If you live in Gateshead, Newcastle, Manchester, Bristol, or Birmingham, there are events you can attend throughout the week. Find an event or download the toolkit to get involved at powertochange.org.uk or search #Community Business Week to find out more. This week's co-host is going to be familiar to regular listeners. We've got Ayeisha Thomas-Smith, who's a social movement strategist, facilitator, and the executive director of the new Economy Organisers Network, otherwise known as NEON. Thank you for coming back.
Thanks, Carys. It's so nice to be back. I've missed you.
Missed you too. How's life?
Life is busy, but good. I feel like we're at that point of the year, where everything slides to, but hasn't quite fallen off the edge yet. But I can see over the edge. It looks restful. It looks nice. So yeah, I'm like feeling very last push energy, which is ironic because I'm also pregnant. So
yeah. Well, congrats. And yeah, I feel like it's like the fag end of the year. It's like, it'll come a point where everything that needed to be done can suddenly be done in January. But you're right, we're not quite at that point. I've still got a really optimistic to-do list I'm not going to get through. And what is keeping you busy other than running NEON?
Just lots of life stuff. Just moved house. Managing a 2-year-old with lots of big feelings, cooking another one in the oven. It's a busy time. My mother-in-law is very stressed. She keeps saying, do you think you should just quit your job?
In this economy?
I'm like, you're going to pay my bills?
Although we do have a shared passion for affordable supermarkets that I discovered in the summer.
Yes.
And we can name Aldi. I'm late to the Aldi party, but I'm now very enthusiastic. Aldi candles.
Yeah, I feel like I've already told you about my deep love for Aldi, but the one that I go to is one of the biggest and most reputable in the UK.
Okay,
widest range, has its own Instagram account.
Is that your opinion, or is that like the official Aldi?
Facts.
Facts.
Yeah,
Great,
of course. And they're not paying me; these are just the facts. And yeah, I would say it's like my main bit of downtime at the moment. It's just browsing Aldi.
It's very calming. There's something very calming about the supermarket, the aisles, just like, although I do not, you live in South London, the best place in the world.
Mm-hmm.
My Aldi's a little bit hectic. It's a small one. And there's a bit of a
problem
that people seem stressed sometimes. So the actual aisles are calming, but by the tills sometimes there's a bit of a...
But when are you going, Carys? What time of week?
I'm going peak times. We're going the evening.
Well, then you're asking for it. This is the thing. This is why I take time out of my day to go when I should be working to Aldi, when I know it's going to be quiet. I've got my little trolley token. So I need to walk around at my leisure. I don't want to be, bustled and hustled. I don't want to be fighting people for those middle aisle bargains.
Yeah. And they have a lot of middle aisle bargains. Okay, well, that's enough free promo for Aldi. Ayeisha and I have taken a look at the news agenda, and we've each picked one story that we think has been over-reported and one that has flown under the radar. So Ayeisha, do you want to go first? What's your over the top?
Yes, my over the top will not be a surprise to any listeners. It's the Rachel Reeves budget debacle. So this is not to be confused with the budget itself, ironically. This is actually the fallout.
If only.
Exactly. This is the fallout from the budget. So a quick recap of what actually happened. It's been very confusing, but UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves is in hot water at the moment. It's her first proper budget, and she's being accused of misleading the public, which is quite the charge. So before the budget, basically Rachel said that weaker productivity was going to blow a big hole in the public finances, and this was kind of seemingly to justify tax rises. But the argument that's being made now is that she actually left out a few key facts that were quite important, like, for example, that OBR had also told her that rising wages and inflation would actually offset a lot of that hit. And then the tea gets hotter and more scalding.
Give us the piping hot tea.
Yes, because later on the OBR actually took the literally unprecedented step of publishing the receipts. They published a forecast that contradicted her kind of doom and gloom analysis, and the S hit the fan. basically, she obviously has denied outright lying. You know, she's saying, I've been honest. I have been underestimated my whole life, which I really love, that kind of Kardashian energy.
She had a real fighter. She did the kind of, I'm a fighter, not a quitter. You know, she was out here. She was
Yeah, I
out
don't
here.
know that she can pull it off, but I rate it. And she said, you know, she's proud of the budgets. I did nothing wrong. However, I feel like the main kind of cut through on this has been that she did, in fact, mislead the public by overstating the bad news and leaving out the good. And that was really important because essentially she wasn't really being honest about the factors that were shaping her decisions. And obviously, Kemi Badenoch, Reeves' number one fan, has not only come out, I mean, she called it every name under the sun. It was school ground. It was
got a bit nasty in the budget
it did
response.
get a bit nasty.
She really came for
I was
her.
like, pull it back. I mean, but to be fair, she had like an hour longer to respond than usual because the OBR accidentally published the report online. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about. But Badenoch has said that she was essentially lying to spook people into accepting her tax hikes and that she should resign. The kind of final piece of the puzzle is that, as I said, the saga got even wilder when the OBR had published the full report an hour earlier by accident. Now, of course, the chairman has now resigned, but it has set up this weird antagonism between the Treasury and the independent watchdog. And so, you know, Starmer has come out to kind of like defend the OBR kind of as a body, but then since them kind of publishing the receipts as well, which as I say was highly unusual, it does feel quite tetchy.
Yeah, I feel like though, bless the OBR, they sort of like,
Bless
because
the
they're civil.
OBR.
Well, I mean, they've had a bit of a nightmare. And like, just sidebar, I did correctly predict the reason the document leaks is that they routinely upload documents ahead of launch date. And we're just like, no one
So
comes
you're
to find
techie,
them.
aren't you? You're techie. That's why you'd know that.
It's relative. I'm not a super techie, but I've managed a lot of websites and worked in comms. And sometimes you upload, what you do with YouTube, you upload something,
But you don't publish
point
it.
anyone.
Okay.
They didn't get it right. Anyway, he's resigned. You're right. So it's been everywhere. I mean, it's not like Rachel Reeves has had a great year generally, but the week following the budget to have a ton of headlines that were basically, did Rachel Reeves lie? Like some saying like she lied, but the general consensus headline across the media was, did she lie? It's not the dream in the week after a budget. So what do you think of the coverage? Has it been overblown, or is it like, are we right to be focusing in on the timeline?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that annoys me about this, and it's always annoyed me ever since I was like a tutor for really posh kids in Dulwich when I first moved to London when I was like 18, 19. And I was tutoring this very like posh young girl called Tabitha, who was like 7. And
Sorry,
that's no
that's
lie.
a very on-brand name. That's
I know.
Name. Okay, we're out here.
And I went to her house for her like second session, and her mum was like, we're going to have to start a bit late because the budget's on and she's watching it. And at the time, yeah. And I was like, she is 7. It really helped me understand. And then everything that's happened since, because people say to me all the time, like the budget is like our Christmas. Like it's so exciting. Yeah, it's lame. It's lame. But I think the fact that like for certain people, and I think it's generally people who are not likely to be really screwed over by the changes in it, like really screwed over, they really get off on the budget and the drama and the scandal. And I've always found it quite icky. You know, definitely as someone who like grew up really poor, whose like family was really impacted by like every little tweak and change that was made and not usually in our favor during budgets. It just pisses me off the idea that people are like, oh, what's it going to be? And I think that this is just a perfect example of the kind of political theatre of it actually overtaking the content. Like it is important to discuss, did she lie? But they're not discussing it through the lens of like, and the reason that's important is because public scrutiny and honesty is really important. And the OBR needs to be able to function coherently, et cetera, et cetera. And the public deserves the truth. They're scrutinizing it more from a kind of like, ooh, is she for the chopping block? And, you know, what does this mean for the Iron Lady too? And it just feels like it really misses the big picture. And like the questions that I think we should be asking are like, was the budget too timid? Who actually pays the price? Are we accepting economic constraints that actually leave us choosing which social protections to fund and which to leave in shreds? Like these feel like the conversations we should be having instead of like, is Rachel Reeves going to have a job by Christmas? Ooh, how exciting.
Yeah, you're right. There's the sort of Westminster bubble, like get the popcorn out theatre. And I do think that like, I'm not going to come out here and defend Rachel Reeves because I didn't like the budget, but and you know, I feel bad for her. I do feel like she has a really tough time in the media, but I think also like this use of lying, like it's not like she literally told us numbers that weren't true. It wasn't like she was
true, yeah.
So like it's also interesting how quickly it flipped into she lied, because what we're actually talking about is the amount of headroom, a phrase I just now feel
Mm.
like I hear all the time. Like, it wasn't like she said, oh, like, she didn't lie about the taxes, she didn't lie about the spending. It's about when she was doing this long, tedious period of briefing the budget before the budget happened. It all rests on an interview she gave in early November, where she was like, oh, income tax might have to go up because everything's looking so bad. And according to the OBRs, like, we got the receipts, and it is giving a bit of a celebrity beef, this whole thing. Although I think the OBR might have just done it because they were like, well, let's be transparent, this is all the stuff that happened.
Yeah, they don't come across as like super catty.
I don't think they've got a lot of game in that department. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
that. I think they were just like, why don't we just tell everyone what happened and that'll clear it up? And it's like, no, babe, that's not how it
And they
works.
did need to kind of back themselves a bit since they had published the thing. They needed to be like, but see, we also are diligent.
I think it's a little bit overblown. Did she lie? Like, she's not like,
Yeah, it's a really
it's
good
more
point.
about how she's communicating things. I do think it plays into this unfortunate right-wing trope around like Labour just wanting to tax everyone and spend money on welfare, which, like, they're really not taxing people as much as they could be. And like, they've cut the two-child benefit cap, which was like the bare minimum human thing they could do. So yeah, it feels like a bit of a distortion. And you're right, beyond the like obligatory, every single media outlet makes her like, will you be better off under this budget, with like a little calculator. It does feel like there's not much chat about the economy, like
Yeah,
the
the
economy that we're
substance.
living in. Yeah.
Exactly. And also like not only the this budget for the economy, but like the larger economic vision of this government. And obviously that's never been their strength. And a lot of, I'm not the first person to point that out, but like our director of comms at Neon, Dora Mead, I was just talking to her before this, and she was saying that, a good way to understand the budget is like progressive measures by stealth. It's like they're doing kind of good stuff, but it's under the radar and in a way that is, not going to draw too much attention. But the things that they do shout about are the things which are, in general, more right wing, like going harder on migration and those kind of things. And that is a risky political game to play, because essentially your entire strategy is predicated on the idea that the people who don't think you're hardline enough will hear that and therefore vote for you. But the people who are kind of probably already voting for you will ignore that and really go digging for the good stuff.
Yeah. And I think like you've also hit on something that I feel like should be instruction to any future left-wing or Labour chancellors out there. Like, the way that Rachel Reeves has been treated since she took office, and like the extent to which, you say they're doing left-wing things by stealth, but anything vaguely lefty gets picked up by the right-wing press, gets picked up by the Tories. Like, all of the headlines before we decided Rachel Reeves had been lying about the budget, all the headlines were like, these 20 billion pounds of tax rises and all this money. And like, it's not like they like, the reality is the government aren't shaking us down like to like fill the public coffers. They're doing the bare minimum to sort of keep things ticking over and maximize headroom. That all important part of the sort of political budgeting process. So yeah, I think it's also like, if you are in any way left-wing economist or future chancellor, like, you may as well just go for it, because they're absolutely going to destroy you. This is like a fairly centrist Labour government with a lot of lukewarm stuff that they're doing, and they're still getting savage. So kind of, why not just go for it?
It's very true. I would say the counter argument to that is Liz Truss, and the fact that if you don't do what they've done, which is like heavily trial everything, then you're really going to be punished by the bond markets and the OBR and others. However, it feels like they're taking that to the extreme of being like, not only are we going to trial these things, but we're essentially going to design like a pretty much kind of market driven budget. That's really about primarily appealing to those folks rather than appeasing them, which is like a whole different strategy.
Yes. And I think like we had a NEF colleague of yours on the budget show last week talking about how our sort of economic announcements are so dependent on bond market reactions. I do think that there is a world between Rachel Reeves and Liz Truss. Like, there
Oh
is
God, yeah,
there is a space between
yeah.
unfunded tax cuts that no one knew about, and I think like a right-wing naivety about like, it was just like, markets like us. I'm right-wing, tax cuts. I think that, yeah, there's a way to do left-wing things that you could trail a little bit or test a little bit without this
Or at
weird
least try and
leaking.
make an argument for.
Yeah, or we heard we were going to get council tax reforms. Like, we've got the mansion tax that people have called it. People who have really expensive property are going to pay more in council tax. Great. But something we've known for ages is the whole council tax system is bananas and it's based on 1991 property valuation. So we actually had that tease they might do something about it, and then they didn't. If you love the show and wish you could hear more conversations like these, you can. Just sign up to support us on Patreon. We got 150 new Patreon supporters this year, which means we're more than halfway towards the show being sustainable. Over the Top, Under the Radar isn't part of a giant media empire, and we are definitely not backed by any billionaires. We don't worry about advertisers or clickbait. We try to bring you an independent take on the news and political agenda. If you sign up to support us on Patreon, you can help to make sure that we keep doing that in 2026 and beyond. If you've been listening for a while and meaning to become a Patreon supporter, please do it today. We are working out our plans for 2026, and a big part of that is our budget. Packages start at £3 a month. That's it. Less than a coffee or a pint, and it keeps us going. Patreon.com/over the top under the radar. And if you become a Patreon supporter, as well as being part of the team of people keeping the pod going, you get an extra episode each week and access to our Over Under WhatsApp community where we geek out between shows. I feel like my over the top is also, for people consuming the news, not going to be a surprise to people. It is David Lammy's reforms to the justice system, aka scrapping of jury trials for lots of defendants. So,
I'm excited about
people who aren't, we talked about this before, and I was like, I don't have an opinion on this. Read into it, spoke to a few people. I now do have quite a lot of opinions. David Lammy has announced that defendants who are accused of a crime where the sentence would be 3 years or less will no longer get a jury trial. So right now, broadly speaking, in the UK, we have magistrates courts, which is like a bunch of retired, mostly older white people who can hear cases that are like not super serious, probably don't need more than a year of custodial time. And then we have jury trials for most other crimes. So David Lammy has proposed this massive scaling back of jury trials. They've stressed that, most serious cases, so rape, murder, manslaughter, will still be heard by a jury. But there will be these new swift courts where just a judge will hear offences. So that's the story. It would be hard to miss it because it was leaked, as this government likes to do, last week. And then it was announced this week. And it's had a ton of coverage. And it is loosely based on a report by a retired judge, Sir Brian Leveson, familiar name, Leveson Report. One thing the UK loves is to get a retired judge or a semi-retired judge to produce a long report about something in government. So these are loosely based on the Brian Leveson reforms. We'll get into that a bit more. And the thing that I want to talk about that has been covered in the media, but I think there's a lot about the coverage that's been lacking, is that we have been told these changes are because there is a huge backlog in the court system. People who are waiting for a trial are waiting for years in some cases. There's different estimates of the backlog, but the Crown Court backlog is projected to reach 100,000 cases by 2028. So basically, what we're being told by the government is we've got to get rid of jury trials because everything's so backlogged, they take too long, they're too expensive. Like, this is the only way that we can sort out the legal system. And even then, they're still like projecting like quite a big backlog. It's not going to get rid of the backlog. There are a lot of things wrong with this announcement and wrong with the coverage. And I want to start, first of all, with the coverage because there are people who have vocally objected to these reforms, including the Conservatives. Wild. We'll get onto that later in the show. Different parts of the legal system, different campaigners, different activists have raised all of the reasons that getting rid of jury trials isn't a good idea. Funnily enough, David Lammy himself has written in defense of juries, as has Keir Starmer. David Lammy highlighting that getting less racially prejudiced outcomes often requires having a jury. So like, juries are good, we want to have them. I think the thing that I'm annoyed at in the media coverage is journalists love to, do the history of juries, talk about Magna Carta, maybe some medieval pictures. People are reporting on the objections to the reforms. But there are a couple of things that are being missed that's driving me a little bit crazy. So first of all, we only have the government's own made up forecasts to suggest that removing jury trials will deal with the backlog. In fact, the Bar Association and a lot of legal professionals have said, we're not sure this will deal with the backlog. So like, number one, as ever, the government's proposing something. We don't actually know if it will lead to efficiency. And there's been very limited interrogation of that. Number two, the Leveson review that has been conducted did not propose these swift courts. Like Leveson himself did not say that it should just be a judge. So we've got this proposal that has come from somewhere. It hasn't necessarily come from the expert. We've got the government like hell for leather committed to a change that people in the legal profession are not sure is going to cause efficiencies. And then we've got these like two massive elephants in the room. One is the reason our court system and our legal system and our prison system are in absolute shambles is that the last government made huge cuts across the system. Legal aid cuts, which people will be familiar with, but cuts across everything. Again, estimates from people in the Bar Association, members of the legal community, are that since 2010, the budget for courts and the criminal justice system has been cut by a fifth. So there's this other thing that happens where journalists report on this story and they're like, well, there's this huge backlog that's got to be cleared. And at no point do we ever hear why. And I think in this instance, it is pretty criminal, pun intended, to not give people the broader context. I think, even the BBC did that. And they said, well, some claim that conservative cuts, I'm sorry, it's basic common sense. If you slash the budget of something by a fifth, it's not going to do its job as well. And then the other thing I want to talk about is this idea of efficiencies. I don't know if people follow The Secret Barrister, who's like a sort of blogger/author, who's a secret barrister. They posted a really good blog post that we'll link to in the show notes that talks about inefficiencies in the court system. It makes some of the points that I've made, that it's not clear that getting rid of jury trials will cause efficiencies. But they also just give some really good examples of glaring inefficiencies in the criminal justice system that we could deal with. Private contractors that have huge public sector contracts who have no penalties if they don't hit their targets. Court sitting days. So if you think Parliament doesn't sit much, you should look at the court system. Like right now, judges and courts don't sit that often. I was called up for jury service. I was there for a week and then they're like, oh, the court isn't sitting anymore. So, you can just go home. So there are loads of other things that we could do. The other thing the secret barrister mentions is giving people a plea deal for pleading out earlier. So there are loads of ways our courts are inefficient. Let's not even get into the fact that the physical buildings themselves are crumbling. Most of them don't have Wi-Fi. Just absorb that. People can't get reliable internet when they're in the courtroom. And there are loads and loads of other problems with the system. The final thing I want to say about that is that a lot of these problems, Leveson was not asked to look into. So we've got a system that isn't efficient, has lost a lot of money, and now we've got a reform that most campaigners and even David Lammy himself said will lead to worse outcomes for people who are on trial. And I guess I just wonder, without sounding like a conspiracy theorist, who does this benefit and what is this for? And I think it also just adds in terms of, the Rachel Reeves story. So there's a Poundland near me, which is closing down. And sometimes this Labour government feels like the closing down Poundland, because it's half the shelves are empty. The staff don't give a fuck because it's closing down. And it's just this real era of just grab what you can get and get out because it's bad vibes in here. And that's how it feels right now. It's we can't afford to fix courts. We've got to give people this pound shop justice because the backlog's so big. I just would like a bit of imagination, and also just sounds like basic consultation with the legal community could have unearthed some slightly better reforms, or even just a different scope for Leveson. Another inquiry, which when you actually look at the terms of reference, you find that the person doing the inquiry was told not to investigate certain things. They've been basically asked to propose reforms that the government's already decided on. So that's my thing on juries. What do you think? Are you in favour? Are you against?
I love the pound shop justice as
pound shop everything at this point.
Very good, very good. I mean, I was really torn about this actually, and when I was researching it, I was I wanted to try and think about it from both perspectives because I think it's easy to just be thing they're doing is bad. I think all the things that basically, I agree with you, and I think therefore it is ultimately not a net good thing to be doing. But when I was thinking about the pros, I was well, it's actually it's scrapping some jury trials is something which is controversial, but not actually that unusual. They don't have juries in lots of European countries. A lot of people who do jury duty, like yourself, often say that was a waste of time. I wasn't paid and I lost money. It's obviously this mad open-ended thing as well, where it's just you could be here for a week, you could be here for 6 months. That's insane.
Yeah, it's wild.
And then the other thing is on the pro side is that I think, as we know from lots and lots of research, progressive activists or people who I guess identify as like broadly on the left tend to overestimate how many people agree with us on lots of things. And I think that often leads in this kind of argument to when you imagine like the jury, you imagine like 12 people who are like, representing all different segments of community with lots of different identities who are like, on the side of rights and justice, like fighting against like a corrupt system. And I don't know if you've ever done market research, but I have.
Quite a lot.
Yes. And I've been in rooms, where it's like, let's discuss this new drink at Starbucks. And that is a cross section of society. And I've never felt more unique, shall we say, in my politics, in my values, than doing the Starbucks market research things. And it's just always made me think I could not do jury duty because we don't live in a society that's like largely free from bias and prejudice, where just having someone with a certain identity means that putting them on a jury, I think it would lead to better outcomes than having an old white guy, which is why I think it's still a bad reform. But I think sometimes we assume that more democratic representation equals better outcomes, and it doesn't always.
Yeah, I think to the extent there's evidence, it is that on civil liberties cases, so like Extinction Rebellion people, that like juries are more sympathetic than judges are. You make a really good point. And like part of the reason I'm grumpy is I really don't want to come on here and like defend institutions of the British state. Like that's not my politics. And I don't understand why I'm being pushed to by this like inept government. Like I don't think the justice system is amazing and this thing that should be defended. I think we put way too many people into prison. I think there are a ton of people cycling in and out of the criminal justice system that like if they just went to rehab, then it would say, like people who are committing crimes to fund their addiction, if instead of throwing them away, we sent them to rehab, we would probably reduce reoffending, reduce crime, save money. So like I don't want to defend this system because I think it's amazing, but I do want the media and like people holding the government to account to like dig into all of these like cost saving proposals, because to the extent we know anything, like they aren't potentially going to save money and they're not getting to the heart of what the problem is. And so the Secret Barrister gave a really specific example. We will link to this piece. Sorry, it captured a lot of what I was feeling. But they say, I'm supposed to be in trial today. The allegations are serious, involving sexual offending against children. They date back to 2022. Dozens of lives put on hold, waiting for the wheels of justice to slowly grind to a jury trial date 3 years later. But there is no jury trial 3 years later. Instead, the trial's been kicked to 2027. And I'm at home writing a blog post. The reason? Nothing to do with juries. The Witness Care Unit, the body responsible for keeping in touch with witnesses and notifying them of court dates, forgot to keep in touch with a key witness. She was only told about the trial date a few days before the trial was about to begin, and she's not available, so the trial cannot go ahead. You'll be depressed to hear this isn't unusual. So like we've got a system, it looks like it is largely about underfunding, but also about mad outsourcing contracts and just like institutions that aren't working, that is grinding to a halt. And so it's not clear that the main blockage is juries. It sounds like from all the research I've done, it's just a system that's like a bit effed, that like is chaotic and isn't working. I think it's right to get a lot of attention, but I wish there was like a bit more media scrutiny of the actual policies and whether they're going to help.
Yeah. And I think there is something really important to say on this, which is it is part of a kind of sinister, slippery slope around normalization of prioritizing efficiency over justice. And that is something that we're seeing quite a lot with this government, this framing around like being more effective, going further and faster, cost-cutting measures. It usually has an element to it, which involves taking out a safeguard or a democratic guardrail under the auspices of, we're going to make this better. And I think, jury trials aren't a luxury item, and scrapping them is basically austerity for civil liberties. It's kind of saying like, it's not something that we can afford to do right now, but when we can, we'll do it again. And I think, it's interesting because like, it reminds me of what they're doing with the NHS, right? You don't fix NHS waiting times by telling half the patients that you're not going to see a real doctor, but that's kind of what they're doing. If you look at some of the NHS, and I'm like, wait, I'm like spotting a bit of a...
sit down, guys.
Yeah, I'm spotting a pattern.
Yeah, and I generally think I'm a bit bored of this, like, we haven't got... And that, I think, is the thread between this and Rachel Reeves. Like, I'm a bit bored of, we just haven't got any choices, no money, this is the only thing we can do. It's like, you're the government, you're in charge, we voted for you. I don't want to hear that there's only one thing you can do. I want you to tell me what you're doing is the right thing for the country, and this is why you're doing it. So, like, boo, David Lammy. Also, you literally wrote in defense of jury trials a few years ago. Are we all meant to pretend that didn't happen?
That's kind of the vibe of this government, isn't it? Like Torsten Bell wrote a book about the redistribution and then was like the biggest government shill for the agenda. But no, I mean, we know that democratic erosion happens not with a bang, but with a reform paper. And that is basically where we are.
Yeah. And also like everything that happens now, I'm also thinking through the lens of like, what will this mean when Nigel Farage is Prime Minister? If Nigel Farage is Prime Minister.
Do not speak that into being.
So it's also like the government may be someone else soon. And then do we want all of this stuff to have happened? Okay, so this brings me, I've got weirdly 2 legal related things this week. So my under the radar is the impact of Robert Jenrick's rhetoric against judges. In October at Tory party conference, Robert Jenrick, Conservative shadow minister, shadow Lord Chancellor, and all-round git, stood up, and you may remember he held up a judge's wig. It was a weird bit of political theatre. It's giving Clint Eastwood with the empty chair. I don't think the wig worked, but basically the wig was a prop so that he could talk about activist judges who he says are enemies of the state. So from that speech and social media posts since, he's been coming for judges that he believes support open borders charities and generally claiming that part of the reason we have incredibly high migration is because of these like activist judges stopping deportations happening. So one media outlet has covered the impact of this, which was The Observer. Naming and shaming judges and leaking their names through social media and the media has led to a lot of judges having death threats, having to move home, having family members concerned for their safety, being escorted to court by police guards. There are a few reasons I wanted to talk about this because I think it has flown under the radar and it's a different angle on our legal system, but I think it's an important one. Number one, we've really just got to keep eyes on Robert Jenrick. This is a man who is a Cameronite conservative, so a sort of centrist, hug a hoodie, whatever, who is reinventing himself as a like far right, alt-right avatar. He stood against Kemi Badenoch in the last leadership contest. He's in the shadow cabinet, and in that contest, he has been tacking hard to the right. And I think we have to keep eyes on him because this is shamelessly cynical. My man doesn't believe this stuff. He just believes it will get him elected and it will make him prime minister. So, in that sense, beware someone like that who will say anything to get more power. So A, it's just part of a pattern of Robert Jenrick doing incredibly far right and incredibly sinister things. B, I think it also is showing the character of the right wing and populist politics that we have now. There always has to be an enemy, whether it's asylum seekers, trans people, Black and brown men who are, put up in hotels and have nothing to do all day, who are apparently all grooming gangs. There will always be an enemy. It will never be rich people. It will never be the private companies that are making a killing while the rest of us are struggling. They will always be pointing the finger. And I think it's the third thing I want to talk about, though, is I think it's really sinister to point the finger at judges. Judges, like many parts of our judicial system, are by no means perfect. But by demonizing and criminalizing them, the thing that he's pointing towards is having politically appointed judges, i.e. political judges. And whilst I don't think that the judges we have now are perfect, I don't think the criminal justice system is perfect, I think it would be far, far worse for members of the judiciary to be appointed by someone like Robert Jenrick. So that's my under the radar. Had you heard anything about this, about these activist judges or open borders judges, whatever they're being called?
Yeah, loads actually. And I think before this story broke, it's actually been something that's been discussed quite a lot in spaces that I've been in with funders or other kind of progressive civil society organizations, because there's loads of amazing groups like the Good Law Project and others that do work in this area that are under attack, from the right, from the Charity Commission, from the government in lots of ways. And so it's something that is actually kind of on the agenda, I think, in civil society at the moment a lot now, less through this lens. And it's, I think what you say about Robert Jenrick is bang on. I think everything you need to know about that man is he ordered the painting over of a mural of Mickey Mouse at a children's immigration detention centre in Dover because he said it was too welcoming for immigrant children. He is a monster. And I think this latest iteration of him is directly imported from the US. And this is something that's really important, I think, about the story and why I'm glad we're talking about it. when you look at the US right, one of the things that they've been very good at strategically over the last few decades is playing a long game, which is focused on institutions. And it's that famous Martin Luther King quote, right? Something like a social movement that only moves people is a revolt, a movement that moves people and institutions is a revolution. And that's something they get on the right, that they need to capture institutions. And when you look at the Roe v. Wade, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and when you look at the Supreme Court justice appointments that were made under the last Trump government, you can really see like a through line over the last 10, 15, 20 years of organizations like the Heritage Foundation and others who have systematically put people and structures in place to back their agenda for the long term. And what we're seeing obviously now is the fruits of that in the US in terms of like the things that Trump is being able to get through the Supreme Court that he never would have before he appointed like Amy Coney Barrett and what's the guy who sexually assaulted someone and then still got appointed? Brett Kavanaugh. Yeah, yeah. And so I think this is the seeds of that here. You start off by intimidation dressed up as politics, which is what Jenrick's doing, right? You start off by saying like, there are these few bad apples in the judiciary who are like this. And then you go on to kind of questioning the entire structure of the judiciary, how people get appointed. And then you get to a point where you're doing what Trump is doing, where you just kind of anoint people who have your politics to put the safeguards in place that you need to ensure your agenda forever. And so it's really important that I think we're talking about this now, but also that we keep eyes on this mechanism and this kind of way of doing politics, because progressives are not good at this. The right is. Which I could say about a lot of things.
So, yeah, I'm really glad that you pointed that out. And I think that's the potential sinister end game of this sort of politics, which, like, shout out to the Daily Mail, because they fired the starting gun during Brexit when they had that like enemies of the people thing for the judges that dared to say that Article 50 needed parliamentary approval. I want to be really clear that like, even if we don't end up in like a horrible right-wing dystopia where like judges are being appointed and they all have these really hardline views, like this is horrible now. Robert Jenrick is like filing complaints against judges. I spoke to someone who's like, I think I might just not do this anymore because like, it doesn't pay me that well. It's like pretty horrible. I'm getting escorted by police to court. I'm not really being offered any protection. So like this sort of bullying does work and it's really unpleasant and it's part of a really toxic turn in our politics. I feel like it bears saying, but in this world where we're always firefighting from sort of right-wing attacks, like we sort of end up on the back foot, as you say, so we don't talk about the other things. Like I am not a huge fan of the judiciary or the British legal system. And like to the extent we do have information about judges, there is like clear evidence that there are quite big problems with racial bias on the bench, which are partly about, but not entirely about, how representative judges are. So there's a report called Racial Bias and the Bench. It was a review from 2020 to 2025. They asked legal professionals, different levels, and 56% of them had witnessed at least one judge acting in a racially biased way. 52% of the people asked had seen discrimination in judicial decision-making, most frequently directed towards Asian people who are Asian or Black. So that's like lawyers, witnesses, and defendants. It's not just about the person standing trial. It's about how the lawyer that represents them, if they're not white, is treated. So like the judiciary and the justice system are not perfect. And I don't think as like progressive people, we want to spend our time defending institutions that don't serve us. But like, as you say, the institutions do matter. And the alternative, which is like politically appointed judges or judges that feel that they have to sort of appease the politician of the day, is much worse than what we have, which, isn't great. So there we go. A lot about the legal system this week.
I know it's weird, as you say, it's a weird position to be taking, kind of defending the judiciary and that kind of stuff. But it feels like these are the conversations that it's just not, these are nuanced conversations that like have to be had with a level of nuance that the media is not affording us at the moment.
Yeah. And also like, I think this politics of bullying, this like finding an enemy and then like demonizing them and bullying them, as long as you've got like right-wing quote unquote populists who aren't willing to deal with the super rich or companies that like destroy the environment, don't pay any tax, make loads of profits, they're going to have to keep finding enemies because there has to be someone to blame. And yeah, I guess it's just also indicative of like the sorts of people that are going to be targeted next. And I think, the other thing to say, we should move on to your under, it's like, half of what Jenrick says is nonsense. He like keeps talking about a judge that set something, didn't deport someone because they didn't like the chicken nuggets in Albania. Like, that's not true. That didn't happen. And it's a bit evocative of like, when people just make stuff up about the EU to make people feel angry about it.
But he's not getting the Rachel Reeves liar, liar, pants on fire edit.
No,
which is very
even though he's a massive
interesting.
liar. Massive
Pants
liar.
on fire. So my under is your party and the conference. And obviously I kind of went back and forth. Should we talk about this? Should we not? But I actually think it's really important to talk about for a few reasons. So just to recap what happened, it was a founding conference of your party in Liverpool. Some of your lovely listeners might have been there last week. And kind of largely what's kind of cut through in the media about this is that it was marred by internal conflict. So one of the co-founders, Zara Sultana, MP, boycotted the first day in protest because several members, including ones affiliated with some other groups like the Socialist Workers' Party, were reportedly kind of denied entry or expelled under the membership rules. There was also some stuff reported around kind of lots of kind of chaos and heckling from the conference floor, people being kicked out, mics being cut. Some things did get reported around decisions that were made, though, and one was officially adopting the name of your party.
There was a vote, wasn't there, on different names, and then one of the names was your party, and they went for your party.
They did, but I think it's important to note there was only one with like 30% of the vote, or whatever. So it was divisive. But they also decided on a collective leadership model, which was a 16-member central exec committee, CEC, with key roles, chair, spokesperson, etc., which would be selected rather than having a single leader. And then other interesting things, they also voted to allow dual membership with other parties, which obviously Labour and Lib Dems and Tories don't. And a lot of good stuff actually did happen and came out of this. But of course, what's being reported in the media is just, the chaos, the inviting, the boycotting, etc. And part of the reason why I think this matters, a few reasons. One is obviously your party is at the moment one of the hopes of the left. A lot of people feel really enthusiastic and passionate about what it could do and what it could be. So I think a lot of people on the left and progressives care about the conference, went to the conference, as I said, and are really invested in the outcomes and just really resent the way it's being covered by the media. Again, that kind of popcorn vibe of just like, let's, laugh while these people eat themselves alive, or typical left. Like some of the reporting I've heard, obviously from the more right-wing outlets, but it has just been scathing to the point of like, they're really getting off on it. They're really giving it a lot of time and airspace, and again, it's a kink. That's frustrating and disappointing. But I think the other reason I wanted to talk about it was because other than the name, the two decisions that were made, so around having a CEC instead of having a single leader and allowing dual party membership, are really interesting to talk about when you're thinking about kind of the formation of political parties, the leadership, because on the kind of governance side of it, I feel quite torn because there is a part of me that is obviously really down with like a democratic mandate that comes from a larger group of people, as we discussed, your jury rather than your judge. And there's a lot to be said for that. I also think there's another part of me that has spent a lot of time in meeting rooms and at citizens' assemblies and, having conversations about processes. That's not what gets people excited. That's not what people sign up for. And I had a friend who was actually involved in the setting up of your party. And one of the things that frustrated them was they said, we had 800,000 people knocking on the door and we were saying, please, can you wait while we put this process together to decide, And obviously you lose a lot of people in that time. And I wonder, having that level of bureaucracy at the top, who does that serve? And what does that block? But then on the other side, there is, there's also the argument about the fact that this, one true leader energy has also not served us so well in the past. And it definitely didn't ultimately serve Corbyn well, I wouldn't say. And so that's one challenge. But then I do want to big up the thing around allowing kind of dual party leadership, because that has been something which has always irked me about the kind of mainstream political parties, is the idea that like you're either with us or you're against us. And, I've done work with politicians who are like, I'm not even allowed to be in the same room as someone from another party because, it's just, I'd get in trouble and I'd get wrapped on the knuckles by the whip. So I do think that is good and a step in the right direction. My overall worry is about the kind of bureaucracy, and I am concerned about the infighting and the message that it's sending to kind of the broader world on what the left can do or not.
I'm glad you brought it up. I had had a lot of thoughts and feelings about the conference. I think the thing you're saying, though, is fundamentally right. There's a bit of a glee from most media outlets at reporting on the mess. And sure, like chaos and conflict are newsy and they are interesting. You know, lobby journalists like to report on the chaos in the government. But I do think there is a bit of a like, yeah, these useless lefties, what a shit show. And yeah, that is hard. I think it's hard to feel like your party never really got a fair hearing. And I think you see that. I mean, you're seeing it less with the Greens, but this sense that people on the left are somehow not legitimate, and then people on the right are to be like fetishized and endlessly obsessed over. And you know, you're going to get a lot more pieces about like who's thinking about voting reform and who are they and why are they doing it. And I haven't seen much interest in like who joined your party and like why, and who came to Liverpool for the conference and like what motivates them. Because you know, we're only interested in a certain type of disaffected voter that is thinking about voting for Nigel Farage and reform. So yeah, I think you're right. There's like a asymmetry in how your party is covered. And that's been a bit of a shit show. The
There's no
whole
denying
like
that.
direct debit gate, people aren't, you know, like getting an email
Yeah.
from one person saying sign up here, and then someone else saying like this isn't secure, like fighting between the two central high profile figures. Yeah, so that's not good. And, you know, people, journalists, everyone has a right to talk about it. I didn't know about the dual membership, partly because I guess the coverage of the conference was mostly about the chaos. And yeah, I think it's an interesting one. It is probably a much more modern way to run a party because people aren't these like diehard tribal beings. And yeah, I wonder, that's yeah, an interesting thing. I'm just generally, again, as someone who has been involved in like decision-making processes where everyone has to reach a consensus, or like activist things where it's like there's no structure, or it's a flat structure. I'm a bit cynical about that stuff. I'm a bit like, just have a leader, man. Like, I mean, the Greens had co-leaders, didn't they? Like, have a leader, have two, but like, I'm not really into leaderless things. And I get that makes me sound right wing and reactionary. But I just feel like people want to face, like, we're seeing it with Zach Polanski now, right? And arguably one of the things that was lost in the sort of time it's taken your party to get themselves together is during that time, Zach Polanski became leader of the Green Party. And that was one person with one clear message to people on the left saying, like, come here. And I think almost definitely there are people who signed up to your party that maybe were just like, I'm going to join the Greens. Like,
Well, that seems to be the vibe right now, is a lot of people are saying, like, post chaotic your party conference, why doesn't Zara just join the Greens? Why don't all these people just join the Greens?
just join
And
the
it's
Greens.
it's a charge to answer. It is a charge to answer. And in general, I think what disappoints me sometimes is it does feel like some of the infighting and the chaos is largely ego driven, right? It's not all because of like, it's not all ego driven. There's obviously a lot of legitimate stuff in there as well, around how do we think about power, how do we think about democracy, what's our vision. But I think there is a lot of it which is two people who are used to having a lot of spotlight arguing about what it means to share the spotlight, not just amongst themselves but also with others, and having clashing visions and all that kind of stuff, and not really being willing to back down, which is not what people need right now. And I think that's why the kind of singularity of Polanski's campaign, which feels to me to be really like, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, this is how you can get involved, is just cleaner and more inviting for people who are looking for a progressive home.
And I think the thing that makes me grumpy about your party, like, even if we take into account that there's like biased press coverage and, you know, Corbyn and Corbynistas never got a fair crack of the whip. And there is not a sense that like the people who voted Labour overwhelmingly in 2017 or who joined Labour Party for Corbyn, like there's not a sense that those people matter politically in the same way that disaffected voters on the right do. So like that is all true and fair. And it is quite annoying to see this. I think it affirms that it was not just that like the media and the infrastructure of the Labour Party were against Jeremy Corbyn. He and the people around him are clearly not great at organising things. Like,
Yes.
you know, there were no excuses now. This was your thing. Like, you got to set it up, you got to announce it when you wanted to, and it hasn't gone well. And then I think B, like, there's a version of this, and I think this is a problem across British politics. There's a version of this where a sort of elder of the left, Jeremy Corbyn, is like anointing a successor,
Yes.
a
Yes.
young
Yes.
Muslim woman of color, Zara Sultana, like to say, I am passing the baton to the next generation. I want to keep the torch alive, and I'm like nurturing and supporting you as a leader. And in a world where that happens, that could have been a really exciting political force, because the reality is a lot of the support for the Corbyn project was support for Corbyn. People liked Corbyn. They felt Corbyn was nice. He had an allotment. They wanted to vote for him. They wanted to be part of his Labour Party. Shown by the fact that the Labour leadership contest after Corbyn lost saw Keir Starmer and everyone else not really trashing Corbyn and being, Keir Starmer said he'd uphold Corbyn's legacy. That was a massive lie, it turns out. But like he felt he had to say that to win and become Labour leader. So I just think it's pretty tragic and sad that rather than like cultivating a next generation, Corbyn or whoever's around him or like whoever's behind the scenes running your party have actually just turned it into like a rivalry and infighting and just like, yeah, really toxic stuff. So I feel annoyed on behalf of the people who signed up. I wasn't one of them, but like the people who signed up, people who came to the conference where, yeah, like I just think they deserve better leadership than that. And in a sense, it's probably going to tarnish the idea of more than one leader. And there probably is a functional way to have like a collective leadership. But I don't know that this project is it. But you know what? I would happily be proved wrong. That's my stance on them.
I really agree with all that. And I think the thing with collective leadership, again, like you can absolutely have that if you have 5 or 6 or 12 people who are singing from the same hymn sheet, who are absolutely kind of mission aligned and who really kind of respect each other and actually chat to each other before they send out emails and press releases. You can do that. Obviously, the media will always want that one figure and will always fetishize that. But I've definitely seen instances where there's been multiple people, pulling something, whether that's like leading a social movement or a political party or whatever, and that's gone down well. But as I said, the level of kind of alignment and trust that requires from those leaders is just clearly the opposite of where we are with your party. And I couldn't agree more with your point around how things could have been, like what it would have been if Corbyn had been willing to say, I'm now passing the baton to you, then that next generation of leadership, and like we're hand in glove taking this thing forward. Like that would have been a way to unite, the Corbynites, the people who support Zara, everyone in the middle, and give a really clear sense of direction. And it just feels like a real missed opportunity. Maybe we will be proven wrong.
Do you think they could turn it around? I'm quite positive. I'm like, this is done now. But that, there's not. I want to be wrong about that. Do you think there's a world in which in a year's time? Because if it worked, then you've got 2 solid political forces to the left of Labour. So that situation, which was kind of it was a real tenet of the New Labour project. I think it's called the Downsian model of basically like if the whole political spectrum was a pier and you had an ice cream shop, you put your ice cream shop in the middle because it's the least distance for everyone to walk. And that politics is one from the centre ground, kind of, New Labour, third wave Democrats. Like that was the consensus of the 90s and then the noughties and then now, right? Of like, you've just got to offer a lukewarm, middle of the road thing. And in an era where everything is polarized, it would be nice to have like a couple of left of Labour options, right? That could be a good thing. But I mean, do you think that is where we're going to be in a year's time? Or
no? Same. Sadly not. I mean, I really like everything you just said. Love it. I'm with you. But no, I mean, I think unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to see it, like it's not like the Greens in your party have like really distinct messaging that appeals to different audiences. They're really kind of strategically trying to kind of develop an electoral strategy that targets different subsections of the left that then could, be accumulated into this kind of strong left flank. It's more that they are bidding and fighting for the same people, I would say. They're the people that generally like Labour don't care about, but there isn't like tons of them to go around. And so I just think essentially what you're doing is kind of further splitting that. And the thing that's unfortunate about it is you will always have people who are like dyed in the wool Corbynites or Labour members or whatever who will, follow him to the end of the pier, as it were. And their votes, I think, will be lost if your party does exist at the next general election. Essentially, most of those are going off the end of the pier. I think the green ones are like a little bit more valuable, but it's certainly not strengthening that flank. So, yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I think I'd probably say probably time to close up shop. But let's see what comes out of the conference.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I mean, they're not gonna, are they? So we'll see. Yeah. Also, like I'm not there with the popcorn, like some journalists. I'm sort of there with my head in my hands or like in a full body cringe sometimes. I wish them well.
Yes,
To quote
me
Gwyneth
too. And
Paltrow, I wish them well.
I really would love, even if the legacy of it is that there's been a political party that has trialed the collective leadership model, that's trialed the dual membership stuff, and that we have some learnings about that. Like, that's super useful as well.
Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you with Power to Change to celebrate Community Business Week.